This is my Odyssey, visiting the birthplaces of the U.S. presidents with pictures and fun facts. I'm Bob Henderson. The 32nd President of the United States was Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR, the fourth of five presidents born in New York State. Roosevelt was born at Hyde Park, 4097 Albany Post Road, near Poughkeepsie on the Hudson River. The estate where he was born, lived, and is buried alongside his wife Eleanor is called Springwood, and the Presidential Library is on the grounds. FDR, probably the most consequential of the 20th century presidents, came from a wealthy family, and he's the only president elected to 4 terms, 1933 to 45. Now, the 22nd Amendment, passed in 1951, would limit a president to just 2 terms. FDR had been the running mate of the losing candidate in 1920, but on his own, he won by big margins 4 different times. He became the fourth of 4 presidents to die in office of natural causes, as just 3 months after his inauguration for his 4th term, he died in Georgia. His vice president, and by the way, the third of his vice presidents, would assume the presidency with the war in Europe and in Japan seemingly won, but not yet concluded. The 33rd president was Harry S. Truman, president 1945 to 53, the only president born in Missouri. Truman was born in southwest Missouri in a small town of Lamar, Missouri. His birthplace home at what is today 1009 Truman Street had no indoor plumbing or electricity in 1884 when Truman was born. He and the family lived here for just 11 months before moving to other small towns in Missouri. Truman would become a senator from his home state before becoming FDR's 3rd running mate in 1944. He would assume the presidency upon FDR's death, and shortly thereafter he would oversee the victorious conclusion of World War II in Europe, and several months later would authorize the dropping of 2 atomic bombs on Japanese cities that ended the war there in August of 1945. Now, a man who had much to do with the outcome of World War II would later become the 34th president, and that man, Dwight David Eisenhower. General Eisenhower, supreme commander of the Allied forces in Europe in World War II, that defeated both Hitler and Mussolini. And Eisenhower planned the D-Day invasion in June of 1944. Eisenhower was one of 3 generals to become president that held the highest military rank. He's the first of 2 presidents born in Texas. He was born in a small town, Denison, Texas, just 4 miles from the Oklahoma border, at 609 South Lamar Avenue in Denison. His father worked for the railroad. The family lived in Denison for about 2 years before moving to Kansas. And incidentally, his presidential library is in Abilene, Kansas. Eisenhower, or Ike as he came to be known, this is a fun fact, would become the president after World War II, became the president of Columbia University in New York City before winning the U.S. presidency. He would serve 2 terms from 1953 to 1961. The 35th president, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, JFK, president 1961 to 63. Kennedy was the 3rd of 4 presidents born in Massachusetts. He was the first Roman Catholic elected president and was born at 83 Beale Street in Brookline, Massachusetts, which borders Boston. And the home is just 10 minutes from the venerable Fenway Park. JFK was the youngest man ever elected president, just 43 years of age, and sadly, he would become the 4th of 4 presidents to be assassinated. Anyone born prior to the late 1950s remembers where we were and what we were doing on November 22nd, 1963, the day Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas. The 36th president, Lyndon Baines Johnson, LBJ, president 1963 to 68. He was the 2nd of 2 presidents born in Texas. Now, Lyndon Johnson had been Kennedy's vice president when Kennedy was assassinated. And he was born in Stonewall, Texas. It's in the hill country west of Austin. LBJ was born on the Johnson Ranch on the Penderalass River, and he and his wife, Lady Bird, are both buried on the ranch. The plane in the hangar at the Johnson Ranch was Air Force One on occasion, but it's a Jetstar. It's not the usual Boeing 707 at the time that ferried the president. And interestingly, there is a 6,000-foot paved runway on the Johnson Ranch. The 37th president was Richard Milhous Nixon, president 1969 to 74. He'd been Eisenhower's vice president for 8 years in the 50s, was the loser of the 1960 election, and believe it or not, Nixon is the only president born in California. He was born in Yorba Linda, California, in Orange County, about 15 minutes from what is today Disneyland. The home at 18001 Yorba Linda Boulevard was the family lemon grove in 1913 when Nixon was born. The presidential library is at the birthplace site, and both the president and his wife are buried there. Nixon was the only president to resign his office, and the helicopter that he took leaving the White House for the last time is at the birthplace site. Now here's a fact. Nixon's vice president, Spiro Agnew, was forced to resign earlier. And the man who took his place was appointed vice president and would later become the 38th president upon the resignation of Nixon. So we'll look at the birthplace of President King next. Oh, wait, you don't remember President King? Well, like the song says, stick around, we'll tell you more. The 38th president of the United States was born Leslie Lynch King Jr., and he's the only president born in Nebraska. Born at 3202 Woolworth Avenue, opposite Hanscom Park, at his paternal grandfather's home in a Tony section of Omaha, Nebraska. His mother separated from his father 2 weeks after he was born, and she eventually settled with her parents in Grand Rapids, Michigan. There she met a man she married, Gerald Rudolph Ford Sr., and Leslie Lynch Jr. became Gerald Rudolph Ford Jr. After serving many years in Congress, Ford was appointed vice president upon the resignation of the sitting vice president, and soon after would become the 38th president upon the resignation of Nixon in 1974. So, Ford was the only president never elected to either the vice presidency or the presidency. He would lose his election bid in 1976 to the man who would become the 39th president. And the 39th president was James Earl Carter. Jimmy Carter, one term, 1977 to 81, the only president born in Georgia. And I had a long ride through rural Georgia one Saturday afternoon to get to the Carter birthplace. Jimmy Carter was born in the tiny town of Plains, Georgia, population 770, on U.S. Route 280. Here's a fun fact. Jimmy Carter was the first president to be born in the hospital, and that was in 1924. The hospital bears his mother Lillian's name today. Fun fact, too, in the little downtown of Plains, there's a store that has any campaign button you could possibly want, a fun place to browse. Jimmy Carter was a peanut farmer, and his infamous brother Billy owned a gas station in Plains. My visits to the birthplaces of the U.S. presidents continues, with the birthplace of the 40th president in the next episode.